Hey, folks, this podcast is brought to you by King Arthur Capital Group. Fund your fight camp, showing fighters how to leverage credit and capital so that they can treat their career like a business. Love to share that information with as many people out there as possible in the fighting world. Finance is always on the top of everybody's mind and always at the peak of conversation. So if you're going through the combat sports world as a fighter, coach, promoter, whatever, and you're looking to make your career work a little bit smarter for you, looking to fund your fight camp, open your world up to some more opportunities along the way, hit up King Arthur Capital Group at Fund Your Fight Camp on Instagram. Check out Fight Club Crate, mystery fight gear, knockout prices, undisputed value, combat sports boxes delivered monthly. Use my promo code TAPTHAT15 at Fight Club Crate for 15% off your first purchase. Follow those folks on Instagram at Fight Club Crate. They're adding new products and goods and whatnot all the time. Very unique stuff for people who are casual or serious practitioners of combat sports. They're working with a bunch of cool companies and small businesses to keep those crates stocked with cool stuff for your monthly delivery. And that's always a winner of a gift idea for the combat connoisseur in your life. And it's the gift that keeps on giving. Lastly, Substats is the analytics and intelligence platform for competitive grappling, giving promoters, leagues, commentators the data they've never had, matchmaking tools, athlete profiles, event breakdowns, and match analysis powered by computer vision. If you compete, if you promote, or you just love competitive grappling, check them out at substats.app. If you're into competitive grappling, Substats is building the analytics layer that the sport has been missing with athlete profiles, event intelligence, and match breakdowns. Check them out at substats.app and use my promo code TAPTHAT for 10% off of your initial purchase with Substats. Also, if you're interested about learning more about King Arthur Capital Group or Substats, go out and check out my interlude episodes that I did with David King Arthur McElroy and Abraham Diaz, where they provide some of those finer details. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you another episode of the Tap That MMA podcast, shifting gears on this very late Tuesday to Wednesday. It's 12:13 a.m., June the 24th now. Switching gears here. We obviously just came off of UFC Fight Night this past weekend. And so I'm going to be getting out my episode for this week's fight night probably sooner than usual, just because having so many scheduling issues. I was supposed to do 2 interlude episodes this weekend. They both fell through on multiple occasions. That happens sometimes, There's, world trying to align my schedule with that of a professional fighter. So it doesn't work out all the time, but we got a bunch more interlude episodes on the calendar. Coming up this week, we do have LFA 236, One Fight Night 44, obviously UFC Fight Night, Cage Warriors 208, PFL San Diego, Zayas vs. Boots, Zuffa Boxing 8. I'm trying to, get my act together and come up, with as much short video content on all that stuff as possible. After my Twitter account got hacked and I was unable to recover it, because I just tweeted out my picks for all these things, and that was a great deal of work for, all these other events. And then, kind of have to come up with a better way to do it. Obviously, a short video for those is probably best, but still trying to figure out how to work that into my weekly schedule as I prepare to move, hopefully for the last time in a very long time, and I expect my second child in October. So, what are we talking about tonight? As you know, I am a lover of spring and alternative professional football. And tonight, now that we've all had enough time to digest from the UFL championship game, digest, what we took in of the 2026 UFL season, wanted to do a UFL season recap and give out the Tap That 2026 UFL awards to those that I think actually deserve those. And so, first and foremost, before we get to awards and everything, let's talk about a few specific subjects within the UFL world. Likes this year. Likes. Because I love spring football in general. I loved that the Louisville and Columbus markets were served this year. That selfishly worked a lot better for me. I thought that, there's a lot of things to say about Mike Rapole, as the owner of the league and how much is different from previous ownership. I think a good deal. I don't think The Rock and Danny, that was her name. I tried not to know. They seemed aloof, after the very beginning stages. Seemed like they got bored with it, or moved a lot of their time elsewhere. They're busy people. Rapoli, it seems interested in maintaining this. Whether he's the guy that's best capable of doing that long term, that remains to be seen, because I still think we had a lot of issues this year that we had in previous years. These trades between teams that are orchestrated by the league it's a slap in the face to competitive football, and it is telling, it's an insult to the fan bases. When you give up, a valuable quarterback for a reserve offensive lineman or whatever, it's transparent, but in not an awesome way. You're just on purpose trying to make one team better and more competitive. And that's not the way competitive sports is supposed to work. I don't care for that. I didn't care for the no punting after the 50 rule and the 4-point field goal. The thing about a long field goal is that the reason you take it is because it is strategically, in your coach's view, the best option. I don't think they needed the extra, it's cool. It does add a little bit of strategy, for a very short sliver of the field. I just don't think it was needed, because the league has done so well in putting kickers in the NFL in successful spots anyway, because of their accuracy and the distance they were getting. So I don't think that all was necessary. And then the fact that I didn't think it was necessary, it got more annoying as the season went on, when they're like, oh, this guy just hit the first 4-point field goal. How do you feel? It's like, he feels the same as if he had just hit a regular field goal, man. I don't know if that extra point means a whole lot to him right now. He wants to win. He wants to make the kick, but I don't think that he felt the weight of being the first in history to hit a 4-point field goal. Hell, if you made field goals worth 7 points next year, someone could be the first in history to make a 7-point field goal. That's just kind of, it's artificial, it's manufactured, and I don't like that. I don't like Dean Blandino's presence at all. The calls this year, frustrating again. You can't help but think constantly, as I talk and put out as much on a weekly basis about betting on the UFL and DFS and stuff as possible, but when certain calls are made at certain times, it is very hard as a fan to believe that the league doesn't have ulterior motives. I don't trust Dean Blandino. Some of the explanations he gives, you could almost write the script out before they put his mic on. I mean, one of the big things that was what Derek Roberson's hit on Chandler Rogers, maybe the worst call of the season. But then there were so many things like at the end of games in overtimes that just felt manufactured and synthetic and disingenuous. You don't want that stuff. You don't want people who are your biggest fans who are betting and spending money on in different ways on the league on a weekly basis and are dedicating time on their Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays to watch your product. You don't want to spit in their face by manipulating results of your games and your season, which is obviously what they were trying to do. And, what a coincidence. Attendance was a big topic of conversation this season. Hold back on that. Like, so just to go with the championship, they go with like, hey, we're not going to St. Louis anymore. Championship game is going to be in DC. Because obviously they assumed that DC was going to be in the championship game. That was at the point where DC looked like they were going to be unstoppable for the whole season. And so they got what they wanted. They got a championship game being played on one of the team's home fields. And it drew a good crowd. Certainly seemed to. It seemed like the ratings on TV were good, throughout the year. Attendance in, Houston and Dallas. I know there was a big point of contention with Birmingham, but I liked where attendance was at. It seemed to be good with the Storm, the Kings, the Aviators, DC, and St. Louis. St. Louis didn't do as well as in previous years. Even the playoff game where they were about to play Orlando's home game in Columbus, which was going to be so dumb. At least they fixed that. At least they found, a high school football field in Florida. I believe it was at like Daytona Beach. And even though the crowd wasn't big, they were talking about the attendance for that game not being awesome. That's not how it looked on TV. It was at a high school, venue. It looked on TV like they drew a good crowd. The crowd was visible. The crowd was audible. I didn't mind that at all. And that brings us to a couple of the good things here. I think a couple of the good things were, switching to the MLS stadiums, which me and several other people have kind of harped on for years, as opposed to these big, giant, soulless, ballless, NFL indoor venues that cost more. But the MLS stadiums, it made the crowds feel bigger and better. And that's the thing. This kind of translates into a conversation about markets and future markets is, they have already announced that they're going to be going into Oklahoma City. They're talking about Boise. They're talking about somewhere in New Mexico. They're talking about like, it was some city in Texas. It might have been El Paso or something. One was Queens, New York. New York and LA have been tried in this format before, and there's not enough different right now about this league. It doesn't have a distinct enough identity, I think, to go into either of those markets and succeed. Maybe in the future, or maybe if they get a little bit back of the old XFL or old USFL kind of, branding and edge, bring something different, and I could see those markets getting into it. But I think Portland, I think Seattle needs to come back. Salt Lake City, I think, sounded cool. Boise, that one I question, not just because of Boise State, but because of the absence of some other factors in Boise, and maybe I'm wrong. But what I think this season has proven is it didn't necessarily matter in the city of Columbus that they also have Ohio State football. People were turning out. I went to an Aviators game at the end of the season when it was, the whole season was done. It was a great environment there. It was Ted Ginn Jr. bobblehead day. There was a good amount of people there. The fanfare was, yeah, every time a plane flew over the stadium, the Aviators fans did their like plane thing, because about 1,000 planes flew over that stadium, which I didn't know that was the case, but that's a cool thing about there. Louisville too is, there has to be a sports factor, obviously, and it has to be a city that loves football. That's why St. Louis was drawing such big crowds, because those people were starved for football. But you also need a little bit of some sort of like hipster factor. And that goes hand in hand with like cities that have MLS or USL soccer stadiums. It goes to, and I don't necessarily mean hipsters like you're thinking like Portland, Seattle. I'm thinking like, people in those cities that are MLS fans that are looking for, sports like this for fun and entertainment, in the off seasons when, all the most notable teams in the area aren't playing. So Columbus and Louisville make a ton of sense. I don't know enough about Oklahoma City, but the fact that it is a city with, I think they have a soccer team at least of like the AAA level, like at US, at least, doesn't everybody? And but Oklahoma City also a one professional sport town. That's also, I think, a good thing, especially when it's an NBA team. I think that is just, historically, I think lend itself pretty well to UFL stuff, even though the seasons are going on at the same time. It's the group of people you're trying to get to watch and go to the games. So I think like Portland and Seattle still make a ton of sense. I think San Antonio could still be on the board even with several failed attempts there. I think that Salt Lake City, I think Santa Fe, Sacramento, where in the East though? Because they're talking about Charlotte or like Charleston, South Carolina. I maybe try like Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. Something like that. But I think there has to be a big love for football, but there also has to be this kind of like sports hipstery factor. Because I think that you could take the UFL, spring football, I think you could take it to a lot of big markets that love football, and it won't make anybody care. There's a group of people out there that call themselves sports fans and football fans that are kind of turn their noses up at the UFL and spring football and any level below NFL or Big Ten / SEC college football at all. I think you can try as much as possible if you're the league to ignore those people. And you can, ignore people that don't like sports at all. There is a group of people that if you specifically target, I think you can consistently get people to come to games and watch games. Another thing I liked was the differing TV slots that they did try. I thought late on Sunday night was a great move. It's a period of time where you're very likely to be at home and on the couch, not doing anything, too attention grabbing. I like the few weekday games they did. I think they need to do more of those. These weeks where you're doing 2 games on a Saturday or 2 games back to back on a Sunday, those are very difficult for me to be able to watch. And I'm somebody who owns a Kings shirt, an Aviators shirt, a USFL shirt, a couple Memphis Showboat shirts. This hat, I had season tickets this year to the AF1's Kentucky Barrels. I'm into this. And on a Saturday, a Sunday afternoon, even Friday at 8 p.m., it is hard as an adult with a wife, a kid, a house, and a job to be able to set aside that set of hours and make sure that you can watch that game. You're competing with a lot of people's attention, or a lot of things for people's attention on, in those slots, those primetime weekend slots. And to the best efforts of some of your biggest fans, they might not be able to watch. And that doesn't make any sense. So I liked the differing days and time slots that they tried. I think they should do more of that. And a couple points moving forward. I think that they should make a real effort to, when you market your entertainment as affordable, yes, as compared to the NFL, absolutely. But if you want people to show up in even bigger numbers, make tickets cheaper. Give away a bunch of tickets to schools. I'm sure they do. Go give them out to any sets of kids. But to make tickets $10, $15, give people every reason in the world to go to your games. That's the lesson there. Bring back the Seattle Sea Dragons. I think that, I think that's an obvious point. The league. Stop lying about anything. It's not good for trust from your fan base. And it's not owning up to the mistakes you are making. And you don't learn from it. It's not taking accountability or responsibility. When I keep hearing that last year's UFL championship game had 14,000 people in attendance, I was there. Me and my brother Zach were there in St. Louis for the 2025 UFL championship. And it's a big, it's a big arena. Your eyes aren't good at looking out at something of that size and determining, how many people you think are there. Okay. I've been to Rupp Arena for Kentucky basketball games many, many times. Holds 24,000 people. And when I tell you that I would be shocked if they said that there were 1,400 people at the 2025 UFL championship game, that's what the reality of it was. It looked like there was 14 people at that game. Quit saying 14,000. That didn't happen. And if they do that with that game, you assume that they're padding attendance numbers at a lot of different places. Birmingham and St. Louis seemed always like they were. Audi Field and with DC, credit to those people, even when their attendance was falling, it didn't matter as much. That fan base has a real distinct flavor. They have all their own traditions. They show up and, have fun at those games. The attendance numbers don't matter as much in DC. Their fans are in it. Battlehawks, it's hard to tell. Like when your attendance has fallen by a lot, but you're still drawing north of 10,000 people. If that's what you're doing, then cool. Maybe think about moving out of the Battle Dome though. I don't know, because it's just a lot of pressure when it's like, all right, like fill it with 18,000 people. Like I don't know if that was ever just like super real. And now the problem is St. Louis has made the playoffs several times and they haven't made a, league championship game. They lost a playoff game again at home. So, we're reaching a point with St. Louis's fan base where like you gotta, and this is what worries me, is the league going to try to pull something to make sure to try to give St. Louis one more chance next year? I could see that. I could see them doing what they can. That's what they do. I don't know. I feel like I had one final point. Battlehawks lost their playoff home game. I mean, you could just go ahead and like, Canton, Ohio is a great destination for all these things. That Hall of Fame stadium is gorgeous. It's a great size. So if they just go back to doing a championship game in Canton, Ohio, that's great. One more final point on just the teams of the league and the different franchises. The Houston Gamblers are a long-running institution that date back to the 80s in the USFL. The Dallas Renegades, I preferred Arlington, but they are, they've won a league championship. Their branding's pretty good. They got those light blue colors that pop and whatnot. It's just that their crowds that they draw are lame. Houston has failed to get any footing. I think last time they had any footing at all was when the Roughnecks made the XFL playoffs with Brandon Silvers and Cole McDonald. And I like the Gamblers. I like their roster this year. I love that they got rid of CJ Johnson as head coach and brought in a better one in Kevin Sumlin. I liked their roster. I liked the quarterbacks they kept bringing in. It was Sam Castronova from the Albany Firebirds, who's had a great arena career. They brought in Talia Tagovailoa, Tua's brother. He was there for a cup of coffee after, I think, getting cut from like a CFL roster. They signed John Reese Plumlee at the end of the year. They had John Trey Kirkland and Justin Hall. So there were plenty of things I liked about Houston. I loved Austin Reed. I loved Sal Cannella when he was with the Renegades, his weird cameo for the Battlehawks at the end of the year. There are things I like about those teams, year in, year out. The thing is, the state of Texas, at least in those two cities, does not seem to give much of a shit. I was having this discussion with a Houston Gamblers fan however long ago, and he was telling me how much, they shouldn't move the Gamblers. He loves the Gamblers. The league should market more in Houston. They have great fans, and say, hey, man, I'm not doubting any of that, and I don't want you to lose your team. The problem is not enough people in the city of Houston, Texas feel the way you do. And in other cities that aren't even as big as Houston and Dallas, a greater percentage of people care. And so if you can't get crowds and you're not successful, I see why the league would want to drag a limping Renegades franchise, into the future. Houston is making it hard. The state of Texas, they've got levels of football down to high school and middle school up to the NFL. They have football teams that they would bleed for. High school teams in Texas play in front of bigger crowds than, UFL teams do in cities where things are working. I don't know if people in Houston and Dallas care enough. I would be interested to see how cities like, we've seen San Antonio, but maybe give that another whirl. How, cities like El Paso, Corpus Christi, think of other cities in Texas. Austin is, going to be, Austin kind of checks a lot of those boxes as far as sports, football, kind of hipster and whatnot. So I just don't know how much more time Houston and, Houston especially, and then also Dallas has. Dallas bought themselves some time. And we saw the real end to the Birmingham Stallions dynasty. They not winning a championship after, being three-peaters in spring football, but you lose your phenomenal coach. You lose. You've had several quarterbacks that worked out, and Matt Corral could have worked in another way. That it wasn't working, great last year. It wasn't going great this year, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I really thought when he came in was going to be the answer. I thought he was going to carry them into the playoffs. They had a lot of players on offense and defense that I thought was going to make this a lot easier for A.J. McCarron. I thought it was going to make A.J. McCarron look better than he was really doing just by the nature of, their continuity, the players that they did have. Why am I hold on. I'm forgetting his name right now. Anthony McFarland. You have a guy like that. You have Tyrion Davis-Price, DTR at quarterback after Matt Corral didn't work out. Jaden Mickens, who, called for 587 yards and 2 touchdowns. Justin Ross had a great year. Deion Kane, they had a lot of, pieces that were important. Dawood Davis that returned on defense, and the defense wasn't good. They couldn't run the ball, and they lost a lot of games that they, probably should have won. And at the end of the day, you look at it and you think that's obviously what happens when the head coach that takes over for a dynasty franchise is a guy that has never been a head coach before. And by the way, that's not me shitting on AJ McCarron. All right? If anybody in the world got a job of high stakes, high pressure, and it's a difficult job that people, work in their career, they do that job for 20 years in a different capacity before they do a job, somewhere and are really good at it and win a championship. If anybody was trying to take over a job like that in any field, and they had never done it before, and in their first year they didn't do well, that would not be surprising. That's what you would expect to happen. So I'm not saying AJ McCarron is an idiot, that he sucks, that he'll never be a good coach. I think he very well could be a good coach. I think that coaching takes time. You look at any good coach, and, in 1988, they were a graduate assistant. They spent 3 years as a wide receivers coach at this college, then an offensive coordinator at this D2 school, head coach at D2, offensive coordinator at an FCS school. Head coach at an FCS for 10 years, then head coach at at an FBS place. And so you see years and years and years of experience in this job to be good at it. So, of course, AJ McCarron in his first year struggled mightily. I think that with a more seasoned and experienced coach, I think the Birmingham Stallions very well could and should have made the playoffs. After the start that Louisville got off to, it is amazing that they were able to make the playoffs at all. And Birmingham limped and sputtered to the end. It was sad to watch, considering, what they were at their height with Jamar Smith, Alex McGough, Adrian Martinez, Skip Holtz as coach, all the defensive playmakers that made their name with Birmingham, all the, different skill position guys, some of them are still on this team. So that's how I feel about the Birmingham Stallions. I think AJ McCarron could get a lot better at coaching, but it's very hard to do a job you've never done before in front of a lot of people, against a lot of people who have done that job longer than you. And in your first year, even with what he had at his disposal, it didn't go well. That's not a shocker. And then real quick, elsewhere in the professional football world, if you're interested, there's the AF1, there's the Indoor Football League, the National Arena League, there's the Indoor League, which started later than a lot of other arena leagues. Those have been entertaining. The International Football Alliance has been an absolute joke. I take the Continental Football League, the Summer Outdoor League being, rebooted from, when it existed decades ago. That's cool because it's playing outside. Tickets don't seem expensive. It's at high school football venues for the most part. The teams are, located regionally so that, it helps with their expense. Those are former semi-pro teams that are in that league. They have by far a better professional quality to them than the International Football Alliance. The Cincinnati Slingers, and I actually saw a video on a lot of the points I'm about to make, but it's funny because I made a lot of these same discoveries on my own as I was trying to get into the Cincinnati Slingers, being in Cincinnati and playing in US Bank Arena in Cincinnati, formerly US Bank Arena. I love that venue because of its unique trash qualities. But the Cincinnati Slingers, to find at the beginning of the season where you could buy individual tickets, to find a schedule, to find a place where you would be able to watch consistently. Oh, download our app on this and follow along. Click the link. This page does not exist according to the internet. You turn on, if you're able to find a live stream of one of their games, which is unlikely. I tried a lot to find them, and it would say, like, you'd go into a live stream and it'd say, follow this link to watch the game. You click on it and it would say, this page doesn't exist. How? Dude, how? If that was an 8th grade computer class project, you would fail. Just get people. Do you want people to pay money to consume the product you're apparently selling and have financial stake in? Get them to where they need to go to watch and buy tickets. And the ticket thing is so much more egregious because the first Cincinnati Slingers game that I watched on YouTube, I don't even know if it had commentary attached to it, which is disgusting. Get 2 dudes attached to the league, find 2 people on LinkedIn, have open casting call, whatever, but find 2 dudes that can commentate a football game and have them commentate your game on the stream. Most obvious shit in the world. Swear to God. Same with regional MMA promotions. Some of the people that run some of these leagues and own some of these teams, you question whether they just like to lose money on this stuff. Do you not see it when... Oh, the travel for this is canceled. All right, so we're doing this. And oh, the stream isn't up. Dude, we've seen this before. This is the makings of a failed league. You're doing a terrible job. At minimum, I should be able to click on a team's website, find their schedule, find where to watch, find where to buy tickets. And they could not accomplish that. It was bad. And watching the streams of the games, I swear to God, at US Bank Arena for the home opener for the Slingers, it almost looked like the lights were up. Like, it looked like maintenance hadn't even come in and, like, turned on the stuff in the building. And then it looked like there was, like, 5 people there. Really, you could see, like, 5 people in the stands. And maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe, but it looked like there was nobody there. It would round down to 0. And the most insulting part of that is when you went to look for individual game tickets. I was seeing some for the Slingers for like, the lowest for certain games was like $80. Are you out of your fucking mind? Those tickets should be $8. If you want people to show up, maybe come to another game. Maybe watch another one of your games. Maybe you get more sponsorship money because of that. You want people to come next year if there's another season? Helps if they're familiar with the product. $80 for a ticket. That is something immediately makes you exit out of it and say, nope, not doing that at all this year. That's not even a paywall to watch your stuff, which would have been better if they could actually stream the stuff reliably. $80 per ticket to go see the Cincinnati Slingers play whatever the team was from Pennsylvania or, whatever. And I would have been interested to see them play one of the international teams. Obviously that's been a problem, the whole international factor. That part was a cool idea. And hopefully I said it in some sort of recorded format, when their season started, but it's like, what a cool idea that'll be for a year before they don't come back. I hope they don't come back. People like the International Football Alliance, the product that they put out there this year, they do not deserve to have another season. You just feel bad for some of the players, the people that, are coaches, employees there, because I'm sure there's a lot of people at that league that are giving their best, and the league did not even close. God, you would hope so. They have a lot of stuff to work. By far the most disappointing, insulting attempt at, indoor football league, arena football, in the entire year. But I will say, obviously Canadian football is going on right now. That's always high quality. Those teams have been around for like 100-something years. And then European football, though they did split into two separate leagues, which is confusing, you can find those live streams on, Saturday and Sunday mornings and afternoons. You can find those live on YouTube very easily. The production quality is high. The competitive play, especially if you're familiar with the guys that are kind of the European mainstays, it was good. And they put, condensed games and highlights on YouTube too. So I, once again, enjoy watching the outdoor European pro football leagues. I like the Continental Football League. That's, very grassroots. I like AF1. Indoor Football League has been, harder to watch since they just stopped putting all their games for free on YouTube. National Arena League, I think, put up some sort of freaking paywall. Insulting, too, because they had the lowest production quality of all the arena leagues, prior to this year. You just don't make your... If someone looks at your game, they shouldn't be able to tell that stuff is cheap. You can't with AF1. You can't with the Indoor Football League. You could before this year with the NAL. I can't say this year. And the International Football Alliance or Arena Football Alliance, whatever, is an absolute joke and an insult to people that were, interested in what they were bringing. All right, so that is the rest of the world of professional alternative pro football, alternative professional football. So without further ado, to talk about some of these teams, to give out some postseason 2026 UFL awards, I will start off with Coach of the Year. We're going into Anthony Becht as Coach of the Year. I could not disagree more, and this is the furthest away. Maybe it was one of my honorable mention picks at the start of the season when I did the whole, season preview and futures breakdown. But in my mind, no question, the Coach of the Year in the UFL for 2026 is Chris Redman. For the way that Louisville started off, they lost their first... 4 games of the season. I'm pulling it up right now. Regular season. Yeah, Louisville loss. Finally get a win in week 4 against the Gamblers. So they go 0-3. They proceed to win their next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of their last 7 games. And they end on a 4-game winning streak to end the regular season. They beat the Battlehawks in St. Louis in the playoffs. And then they go into Audi Field and beat the DC Defenders for the 2026 UFL Championship. Chris Redman, to me, is unquestionably the 2026 UFL Coach of the Year. Anthony Becht did what he always does, which is good. Got his team to the playoffs again. They had the best record in the league. But with Anthony Becht, you can't go giving him any awards until the season's totally over, because there's the playoffs, and that is where we know he's had his issues. So Anthony Becht did a fine job. Shannon Harris, up till a certain point in the season, I thought was a lock to win it again. I thought like Pro could have won it, but it probably wasn't going to be the case. The Battlehawks, especially with the changes they made at quarterback, the issues they had at quarterback, they were great defensively. And I mean, Jarvian Howard and Akeem Butler had very special years, but the Battlehawks just, they were like, how to put it? I think the Battlehawks exceeded expectations. I think is the best way to put it. I would have loved to have seen Michael Pratt at quarterback the whole year for the Battlehawks. And having to go to Luis Perez at the end of the year was short-sighted, perhaps. That was maybe some bad intel from the league or from the back. I think that like that could have made a big difference for them, but Luis Perez is a good leader, but it was not gonna like be that drastic of a chance, especially with the turnovers that he commits and the drawbacks he has as a quarterback. Chris Redman is pretty much a first-time head coach after starting off 0-3. After having to bench their quarterback, Jason Bean. They rattle off 6 out of 7, went on the road twice in the playoffs to win the championship. You have to go to Chandler Rogers in the middle of the season. You do a clean sweep of the DC Defenders. The defense of the Louisville Kings was the, biggest single component of any team all season. And so for the adjustments that he had to make in the middle of the year, when it would have been so easy for everybody in Louisville to pack it in, for the staff that he assembled, for the way that they never stopped kind of like tinkering with their roster, even in parts where it got like really confusing. Like I believe it was Deneric Prince that got cut at a certain point in the year. It was like, what's that about? Honestly, hard to question now because they were unbeatable to finish off the season. And, was that Chris Redman catching lightning in a bottle or what? I don't know. But Chris Redman, as compared to the other first-year coaches, the other very experienced coaches in the league, he took a team to the playoffs that it didn't look at first was going to win a single game. They won the championship. They ended with a crazy amount of momentum. Their quarterback in their running game became such reliable forces to end the season. And the defense was the hallmark. Their special teams, they had the most impactful kicker in the whole league. So I don't think it's close. I think Anthony Becht and Shannon Harris did, great jobs, but the 2026 UFL Coach of the Year should have been Chris Redman. And so, also this is a little bit outdated of it, but as of June 17th, 13 players from the UFL had signed to different NFL rosters. On June 17th, so a week ago, NFL clubs had requested 58 workout permissions involving 40 UFL players. 47 workouts had taken place as NFL teams continue evaluating UFL talent. The 13 players as of last week that had been signed to NFL rosters, from the Aviators, linebacker Tony Fields with the Bears, wide receiver Tame Martin to the Lions, cornerback Sean Wade with the Eagles, wide receiver Eric Uzukanma to the Eagles. Wade, obviously, with the Renegades. Uzukanma with the Defenders. The Gamblers, safety Major Burns to the Dolphins. Wide receiver Jalen Cropper. Love Cropper Moreno with the Saints. Caden Davis to the Bears. And QB Hunter Deckers to the Saints. The Louisville Kings had Tariq Black sign with the Lions. Tanner Brown, obviously, signs with the Saints. New that Tanner Brown was going to be one of the first to find an NFL opportunity. He's the most likely of all these to stay. And then Lucky Jackson signed with the Lions. And then Hakeem Butler signed with the Broncos. And then Sean Fresh from St. Louis signed with the Broncos too. A ton of different workouts have happened. You know that there's, going to be more news on that and developments. That's only going to, kind of ramp up. I always love to see the guys who end up getting, workouts, camp invites, signing to a practice squad, whatever it is, from the league to the NFL. That's, that speaks well of the league. You want these guys to, go on and do it. It speaks to the quality of the league. Yeah. And ultimately that's, just kind of marketing for the league. If, Tanner Brown comes in, hits a 60-yarder in the NFL next season, and the 2026 UFL special teams player. They're like, damn, another kicker that everybody wants in fantasy that was, UFL special teams player of the year. So that's always a good thing. And now let's put together here our awards. So offensive player of the year. You could make a case for someone like Deion Jackson just because he led the league in rushing with 449 yards and 7 touchdowns. What my problem with Deion Jackson was all year was that that production was not consistent and it did dwindle. You even see, Abram Smith and Xavier Valade get a lot more involved in the running game to end the year. Hakeem Butler and even guys like Elijah Badger, 588 yards, 5 touchdowns. Hakeem Butler, 641 yards, 3 touchdowns. Hakeem Butler was a little bit inconsistent too, but it's he is just so. That guy is the best receiver in the league as an individual skill and individual talent. And, St. Louis really depended on him for, a good amount of their passing production. And with guys like, Elijah Badger, Tyler Vaughns was fool's gold too. He had that really crazy game early in the season that made his numbers seem a lot crazier. But Orlando had 3 receivers, 3 or 4 that you could call, all league type players. KJ Hamler, Cam Camper, Chris Rowland, Elijah Badger, all that. I love Jayshon Corbin and what he did in that backfield. End of the year, 3rd in rushing yards at 438 with 3 touchdowns. And there was the running backs from number 1 to number 14, 15. The gap isn't massive in terms of their efficiency, what they did per game, with their playing time. It just, no one stood out that much more. And that's what offensive player of the year to me just has to be Jack Plummer. I thought Austin Reed was a shoo-in for it after the first couple of games, and he still finished the year 2nd in passing yards, most passing touchdowns, and 21 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, completing 56.3% of his pass, but really struggled for a stretch of the year. Eventually kind of got his feet back under him, but Austin Reed's, I hope that ends up working out, wherever he is. I like him, and I loved him at Western Kentucky, but for what I thought was going to be a guaranteed, oh my God, nobody can stop this guy. He eventually, was stopped. And those numbers are, a big reflection of how he started the year. And, the completion percentage, the interceptions, that's a lot more telling of where he ended it. I thought there was a moment there when Jordan Ta'amu was, with the defenders as, repeat champions, with Shannon Harris as repeat coach of the year. I thought there was a very good shot, in that meaty middle part of the season that Jordan Ta'amu was going to be league MVP. And he just didn't get to finish out the season, got hurt. And had a very nice season up to that point, though. So there's that. I thought Dorian Thompson-Robinson, when he came in, I thought was a sleeper to take the Stallions to the playoffs and maybe win Offensive Player of the Year. But after a decent start in the first couple of games, it just didn't work out. But that's more Birmingham that I think than him. He runs well. He's a talented guy, and it just wasn't a good situation in Birmingham this year to be him. I think Matt Corral, maybe under the old regime could have, had a lot better of a season too. So Offensive Player of the Year and the quarterback selection for my Tap That UFL All First Team is Jack Plummer. Completed 65% of his passes through for a league-leading 2,188 yards, 17 touchdowns, 1 interception. 1 interception. Second in the league in completion percentage. Second in the league in passing touchdowns. Second in the league in efficiency rating. Amazing year. Every single game he was so reliable and consistent. He had a ton of weapons to work with. But that's the case for a lot of football teams at a lot of different levels of football, and it doesn't mean that their quarterback is going to have a season as good as Jack Plummer did. And so, Jack Plummer, I'm sure that guy will get some sort of opportunity to, maybe be a practice squad guy or whatever, but I liked him at California and at Louisville, and this was a phenomenal first season in spring football for him. So congratulations to Jack Plummer, the 2026 Tap That UFL Offensive Player of the Year. Defensive Player of the Year. According to the league, it was Cam Gill. And according to me, it was Cam Gill. Though it was not an easy determination this year. There were a lot of defensive players that made huge differences. And Birmingham had the 2 leading tacklers in the league, but that actually speaks to the things that were going wrong for them on defense. But Tony Fields was, one for Columbus. Jaheim Thomas had a bunch of tackles for Louisville. Fred Tompkins in Columbus. Donald Payne and Quinterio Cole, always reliable on defense in spring football. Jordan Mosley and Jordan Williams in St. Louis. Not producing too much in any one category, maybe besides tackles, but they do a little bit of everything. Sam Kidd, a similar guy in D.C. Major Burns at safety for Houston. McKay Gardner, we'll get to the, some of the cornerbacks and whatnot. So there was a lot of people on defense this year that made a big difference. Kedrick Whitehead was another for Columbus. Steel Chambers for Louisville. Louisville had so many. Deontay Anderson in D.C., Nate Metters in Orlando, Marvin Moody, Malik Fisher, Kiava Tizino in Birmingham, a lot of tackles, 3 forced fumbles. I just wasn't crazy about what he did this year. If he had done that for another team, I'd probably be speaking on it a lot more favorably. But, Corey Mayfield in Louisville leading the league with 4 interceptions. Major Burns had 4 interceptions as well. DJ Miller in Columbus, 3 interceptions and a return for a touchdown. Sean Wade for Dallas, 3 interceptions, and was tied for the league leading 12 total passes defended with 9 breakups, right behind Kerry Vincent Jr. of Houston. Gary and Conley for DC, 10 passes defended, 6 breakup, 4 interceptions. Wait. 2 interceptions. It was Corey Mayfield that had the 4. Eric Garror from Louisville, 9 pass defense, 7 breakup, 2 interceptions. Cam Dantzler for Louisville had a bunch of breakups and an interception. Tackles for loss and sacks were where you really see, I think, who the most valuable defensive players were. There were a lot of games this year where you saw just pressure on the quarterback being the number one factor all game. Cam Gill led the league with 10 sacks and I believe set a UFL record. 12 tackles for loss. And I mean, just it was the biggest factor in every game he was in, pretty much. So yeah, Cam Gill, congratulations. Tap that 2026 UFL Defensive Player of the Year. And for my money, the UFL 2026 MVP, even over Jack Plummer, goes to Cam Gill of the champion Louisville Kings. Give it up for him. But there was Malik Fisher, 7.5 sacks and 11 tackles for loss. Derek Roberson, 7 sacks and 9 tackles for loss. Peter Tomapena, 9 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. Ron Stone of Columbus. 5.5 sacks. I forget how many tackles for loss he had. He was up there up until near the end. Demone Harris for St. Louis, Carlos Davis. St. Louis had a lot of those guys. Harris didn't stick out to me as much as Carlos Davis did all year. Travis Feeney had 6 tackles for loss for the Battlehawks. But Davis and Harris both had 5 sacks each. Keyshawn Banks was a guy that I didn't think got enough love this season for the defensive presence he had for Orlando. 5 sacks and second in the league with 11 tackles for loss. Kenny Dyson from Houston, 4.5 and 4.5 sacks, 7 tackles for loss. Kenny Willix, 4.5 sacks for Columbus, and I don't know how many tackles for loss, but Columbus had a surprising amount of players that I paid attention to all year between Ron Stone, Kedrick Whitehead, Kenny Wilkes, DJ Miller. Yeah. There was a lot of defensive playmakers this year. It was I don't know, change of pace. Isaiah Buggs also had a good season for Orlando, 8 tackles for loss. So some familiar names, Peter Tomapenu, Derek Roberson, Malik Fisher. But Columbus had some really good pieces on defense. I have high hopes for the Aviators. I think they might need a better, head coach than Ted Ginn Jr. At least the Columbus Aviators play a different style of football than, so many other, teams in the league. They ran it a lot. Columbus actually had 1, 2, 3, 4 guys in the top 16 in the league in rushing yards, with John Lovett having 312 yards, 2 touchdowns, Toa Taua, 311 yards, 3 touchdowns, Zaquandre White, 275 yards, 4 touchdowns, and Jalen McClendon, 238 yards, 2 touchdowns. And that is not even accounting for Jalen Morton, former arena football star Jalen Morton, coming into the end of the year having 140 yards and 2 touchdowns rushing. Columbus did very well running the ball, and they had some really good pieces on defense. It just, I even love the way they use their tight ends with, Alize Mack and Gunnar Oaks. Was Gunnar Oaks the other tight end on that roster, I believe? Yeah. They combined for 290 yards and 2 touchdowns, those 2 tight ends. So I liked a lot of things that Columbus did this year. I liked their fan base. Some subtle changes with, from the inside out of that organization. They, you know, they could be, quite easily a playoff team. They weren't even eliminated until the last week this year. So yeah, that absolutely could be them. So coach of the year, Chris Redman. Offensive player of the year, Jack Plummer. Defensive player of the year and MVP, Cam Gill. Now let's put together the all UFL team. So the UFL officially has quarterback Jack Plummer on the all UFL team. I agree. Running back. They have one running back listed. I'm going to do two. They have Deion Jackson for DC as their all UFL running back. It's not where I would go, honestly. Like, I think Deion Jackson, a lot of his production was early, especially the touchdowns. His efficiency per run was good. He had a good season. I think a lot of that is just kind of the product of like how the DC defenders play football. Because you also had Abram Smith and Xavier Valladay. You had Jordan Tiamo rush for 196 yards. To me, the two most valuable running backs in the league this year were Jarvian Howard and Jayshon Corbin. Jarvian Howard rushed for 446 yards, 0 touchdowns, but the consistency was definitely there. St. Louis did start to deploy some other dudes like Kylan James. Forgetting one. And Kevin Lattilis. But they only combined for like 300 yards and a couple of touchdowns. Jarvian Howard was the bell cow. Jayshon Corbin, only 3.3 yards per carry, 43.8 yards per game, 438 yards, 3 touchdowns, but the consistency was absolutely there with Jayshon Corbin, kind of week in and week out. They leaned on him to do his part of the game. And Orlando's next best rusher was Jack Plummer with 189 yards and 2 touchdowns, ranking 20th in the league. I don't think they had another running back. Trey Stewart ranked 29th in the league with 108 yards in 5 games. Jayshon Corbin and Jarvian Howard had to do a lot more for their teams. So they would kind of be like my share of the all UFL running backs, but you also can't ignore what Ian Wheeler and James Robinson accomplished together when Ian Wheeler, 370 yards, 6 touchdowns, James Robinson in total, and that's in 9 games. James Robinson in six games, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 50 yards per game. And that was after some absolute dud games where it seemed like the Kings did not want to use him at all, and they weren't deploying him right. But Ian Wheeler and James Robinson were massive factors for the Louisville Kings and their route to a championship. James Robinson led the league in yards per game in his 6 games. Jarvian Howard was actually second for, I think he had to have a minimum games played was 50% and 10 attempts per game. And I guess Deion Jackson didn't qualify. So, yeah, for what they were asked to do each week in and week out. And so I would say, like, all UFL first team, 2 running backs, Jarvian Howard and Jayshon Corbin. Second team, I would pair together James Robinson, Ian Wheeler. Deion Jackson just was not nearly as much of a factor late in the season when it really mattered, and wasn't asked to do as much by his team as the season went on. So that's running back. Wide receivers. The league picked 3. That's a fair number. That'll be real hard to narrow down, but it's a fair number. Hakeem Butler has to be, one of those 3. 22.1 yards per reception, 71.2 yards per game, 641 yards in 9 games, 3 touchdowns. I mean, Tyler Vaughn's had 7 touchdowns. Guys like Cornell Powell, Tay Martin, Tariq Black, Ty Scott, once you got below like 400 yards receiving, the gap really narrows. There's that like KJ Hamler, Cam Camper, Chris Rowland, and Elijah Badger were all had amazing seasons. I think like it's very fair to have Elijah Badger and Chris Rowland at least share a spot of the All UFL designation for combining for 1,117 yards receiving and 10 touchdowns between them. But like, I think you have to also include Jaden Mickens, 587 yards, 2 touchdowns, 58.7 yards per game. I would not have Tyler Vaughn's All UFL. I would say Butler, Badger, and Rowland, and Jaden Mickens deserves it. There's a handful that like just miss out that I would love. I would love to do an All UFL 4th team, and but I don't think we have nearly enough time tonight. If I had to go with one like, bolder pick for All UFL, it would be Isaiah Winstead. In 8 games played, he had 474 yards, 3 touchdowns, and actually tops everybody at 59.3 yards per game over his 8 games. Yeah, the only guy he doesn't beat out is Akeem Butler there. But Isaiah Winstead had 59.3 yards per game, 474 yards, 3 touchdowns. Yards per reception, he was third too, 16.3, actually tied with Elijah Badger. So Isaiah Winstead was instrumental in the Louisville Kings winning the championship and giving Chandler Rogers, a big play threat to target when otherwise Chandler Rogers' game was quite conservative, but well managed. He managed those games well, and he really got in a rhythm over the second half of the season. Those would be my all-league receivers. Give it up for them. Tight end. I am going to do. I'm going to do 2. The league does 1, and theirs was Tyler Neville from the Battlehawks. Tyler Neville. I gotta Google his stats in another way. Because that one kind of came as a bit of a surprise to me. Tyler Neville certainly had his, very impactful plays. There was maybe a higher percentage of plays that were impact plays than, anyone else at his position. All right, here we go. Receiving. Tyler Neville in 8 games caught 13 passes for 125 yards and 4 touchdowns. Led the team in receiving touchdowns. Was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th on the team in receiving yards. And 6th in receptions. See if I can find a game log here. Nope, not on this website. The UFL's website, by the way. But I see why you called Tyler Neville your All UFL tight end. I had other thoughts. So Yeah. For my tight end designations, I think tight end one is Zach Davidson from Louisville. Played in all 10 games, 250 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. Um, among tight ends, led the UFL in receiving yards. Then my second pick would be Briley Moore, tight end for DC. DC also deployed Mason Fairchild this year, but in 7 games, Briley Moore had 167 yards and 4 touchdowns. In a variety of the defenders used him creatively. And I love to see that. Zach Davidson was someone I pinpointed before the season started as someone that I loved that the Kings had. I loved the Kings started the preseason kind of stuff with 3 tight ends I loved. The other one was Jalen Weidermeyer, who we didn't see at all this season. And then the other one was the dude from Europe. European. And Louisville. Kings. Florian Bierbaumer. That guy's awesome in Europe. 6'6", 240-pound Austrian. I would have loved to see him in the league this year. But Zach Davidson was the one that most consistently, week in and week out, was out there producing as a pass catcher. So he would be my all UFL tight end selection. Briley Moore would be right behind there as, he averaged, 23.9 yards per game. Davidson averaged 250. Briley Moore played 7 games and ended up with 4 touchdowns, just as many as Tyler Neville, more receiving yards. And Briley Moore got deployed creatively. I wish I could combine Alize Mack and Gunnar Oaks. I love both of those dudes. I love the way Columbus used them, the fact that they used them at all. I wish they would have used Alize Mack more as the season was coming to a close. But those 2 dudes combined, like I said earlier, for 290 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I think that's what Columbus should, keep doing next year, especially if they have someone like Jalen McClendon or Jalen Morton at quarterback, is continue to utilize those tight ends. And, have those guys be higher on the receiving leaderboard next year and use those guys more. Even though Tegan Jr. did do a pretty good job of identifying some kind of sleeper, gym prospect receivers like Tay Martin, like they got good work out of Kiki Chisholm, but like Antoine Wells was another one. Wells and Martin combined for greater than 600, yards receiving, might have been more than that, and 4 touchdowns between them. Tegan Jr. did a good job of that part. So those are the 2 tight ends I would pick, and then the 2 tight ends that I wish I could combine into one so that I could pick them. Now, offensive line, this is something I'm less, able to evaluate. The league's all UFL offensive line was Mike Panazia from St. Louis at center. That would make sense. You could have picked that guy preseason to likely be all UFL. Gareth Warren from Houston. God knows Houston needed a lot of help up front. Michael Gonzalez from Orlando was another guy that you knew coming into the year was going to be one of the premier offensive linemen in the league. Gottlieb Ayedzi from Houston. And the Houston offensive line had to do a lot of work between all the different quarterbacks they were putting in and then the production they eventually got out of the backfield. And then Yasir Durant from DC. I thought more people from maybe DC or St. Louis would have been, all UFL worthy, on the offensive line. I think someone from Louisville probably deserves some credit on that end too, because of, how their offense was able to succeed as, in the second half of the season. But ultimately, the guys like Gonzalez and Panazio, those are the guys that, you knew coming into the year were going to be some of the league's best offensive linemen. And, those guys were doing a hard job to do in Houston. But I'm not like the best at evaluating offensive linemen individually. But I talked about Panasiuk and Michael Gonzalez before the season started. We knew they were going to be really good. Defensive tackle, Isaiah Buggs and Carlos Davis. Carlos Davis, I can definitely get to. Where's Isaiah Buggs? How many tackles in total? Just gonna have to go to individual teams rosters. Yeah, so the league's all UFL defensive team was Isaiah Buggs from Orlando, defensive tackle, Carlos Davis, St. Louis, defensive tackle, edge Cam Gill, edge Derek Roberson, linebacker Tay Crowder, linebacker Tony Fields, linebacker Kiava Tazino, defensive backs Major Burns, DJ Miller, Tazino from Birmingham, by the way, Fields from Columbus, Burns from Houston, DJ Miller from Columbus, Corey Mayfield from Louisville, and Kerry Vincent from Houston. I would rather have Keyshawn Banks in there over Isaiah Buggs on the all UFL team. Keyshawn Banks was, very impactful in those big plays, throughout the year. I do some searching around here. Let's go to the Battle Hawks because they're going to have plenty here. Make an argument for Damone Harris. But we're talking about over Carlos Davis is the thing. I think from Columbus, both Kenny Wilkes and Ron Stone should have been in the conversation for all UFL. At the defensive tackle, defensive end, places. Cam Gill and Derek Roberson are perfect selections. But I think Keyshawn Banks needs to be a part of this. Carlos Davis was great. I just don't know if he was the, one of the two best in what was a pretty good year for defense. And Columbus had its share of, very high performers that I just mentioned. But I'll say Keyshawn Banks and Carlos Davis, Cam Gill and Derek Roberson. Now, 3 linebackers. And the 3 linebackers the league picked, two were from Birmingham. The other was Tony Fields from Columbus. And then defensively, what did Tony Fields led Columbus? 77 total tackles, 1 sack, 5 tackles for loss. That was certainly a fantastic season by him. Fred Tompkins, too. 54 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 0 sacks, but certainly impactful. Now let's check out Houston real quick. Yeah, Kyon Barrs, nose tackle for Houston. He had a good season for sure. Malik Fisher just misses out, I think, on the slots we've already covered. Because Malik Fisher did end up second in the league in sacks with 7.5 and third in tackles for loss at 11. It's really hard for me to leave him off. Let's just say in spirit, he's, one of my ghost honorable mention additions to this all UFL team. He was phenomenal. More linebackers from Houston deserving a nod here. Marvin Moody Jr., who ended up 33rd in the league with 40 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss. And let's see what else. Then we'll go to Dallas, and we'll try to wrap up the defense aspect. Yeah, Anthony Hines. Ended up having 51 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss. That was big. But Marvin Moody, 36 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, no sacks. So Houston had, a handful of really good performers. Charlie Thomas, too. 4 tackles for loss at middle linebacker. 40 total tackles and 1.5 sacks. Houston had like 6 dudes that at a couple of those spots that are very competitive, I think otherwise, you'd be talking about maybe giving a nod to. Let's take a look at Dallas real quick. JT Tyler at outside linebacker led the Renegades with 62 total tackles, had 4 tackles for loss. Donald Payne, spring football staple, 56 total tackles, 0 tackles for loss, and 0 sacks. Surprising from him. It's like Quinterio Cole had a really good season. Also included 2 interceptions. Ajeen Harris also did well at cornerback for the Renegades. I don't know. Their defense was pretty forgettable this year. Taco Charlton made a little bit of a difference. Darius Maragne. Willie Taylor, 4 sacks, 2 tackles for loss. At outside linebacker. One more here. I'm going to get this right. Jordan Williams is a linebacker. Had 4 tackles for loss, half a sack, an interception, 3 pass breakups, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. He's like a jack of all trades. You'll love to see that. Peter Tamapenu, 33 total tackles, 9 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. Is that reflected? Yeah. So, to circle this back around, I'd say Keyshawn Banks, Carlos Davis, as probably the anchor of one of the league's top defenses. Cam Gill and Derek Roberson, absolutely all UFL. 3 linebackers, though. Like, I'll give you Kayava Tezino. Second in the league in total tackles with 77, 48 of those solo, 4 tackles for loss, 3 forced fumbles. Let's just see Birmingham individual team stats. Jay Crowder, he had 2 tackles for loss. He did have 2 interceptions. 4 passes broken up. Neither of them had a sack. Yeah, I guess. Now, they also did a really good season from Isaiah Green May. 6 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. Tizino and Crowder are just kind of a wash to me. And like sometimes in this league, you don't want to have the guys with the most tackles. I don't know. All right. If we're only going to include one linebacker from Birmingham, I guess it is Tay Crowder. Him and Tizino both did a little bit of everything. But then Tony Fields, I do think, needs to be one of those linebackers with 77 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss. We talked about what he accomplished this season. Sam Kidd led the defenders. Sam Kidd was a safety. He did lead them in tackles, though, with 50, had 4 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 2 interceptions. Love what Sam Kidd did this year. Brandon Smith at linebacker was very strong. So I'd say like Tay Crowder, Tony Fields, Peter Tamapeno be number 3 for me. Brandon Smith from DC might be the last one to round out the linebackers there. But again, when it comes to the defensive line, linebackers, it was a very strong year. You could come up with 3 all UFL teams that would be very good. And they just did 4 defensive backs. I'll pick a few cornerbacks, a couple of safeties here. Sam Kidd, I do think deserves to be an all UFL safety. Kerry Vincent has to be a part of that. DJ Miller with his 12 passes defended, 3 interceptions. Major Burns at safety has to be one of those guys. So that's 1, 2, 3. Sam Kidd. Gary and Conley with his 2 picks, 1 return for a touchdown, 10 total passes defended, 8 breakups. Corey Mayfield from Louisville, 10 passes defended, 6 breakups, 4 interceptions. Cam Dancer would be a candidate, but I like Sean Wade then needs to round out this group as, and you could talk about Jordan Mosley at safety. He had a lot of tackles. Didn't do necessarily a whole lot. He did force 2 fumbles. It was just a lot of tackling, which is good. That's important. But Sean Wade from the Renegades, 12 passes defended, 9 breakups, 3 interceptions, ranked 2nd in the league in passes defended, 4th in the league in interceptions. So safeties and cornerbacks, I'd have to say Sam Kidd, Major Burns, DJ Miller, Sean Wade, Kerry Vincent, Gary Conley, Corey Mayfield. Yeah, there's safeties I'm missing. And by Louisville outside Eric Gore and Cam Dantzler, that I think could have been in that conversation. Stephen Jones from Dallas had himself a good season too. So that's how I'd wrap up that portion of the defense. That's our defensive team. All right. Jack Plummer. Jashawn Corbin and Jashawn Corbin and Jarvian Howard. And a little mixture of the Kings running backs is what I would say. Hakeem Butler, Roland Badger, Mickens, Zach Davidson, Briley Moore, offensive line. Panizia, Gareth Warren, Michael Gonzalez, Gottlieb Ayedze, and Yasir Durant left that untouched from what the UFL did. Keyshawn Banks, Carlos Davis, Cam Gill, Derek Roberson. I'd say Tay Crowder, Tony Fields, Peter Tamapeno. I know I left a linebacker. Brandon. Brandon Smith from DC. And then there were a handful of dudes from Columbus. Can Kenny Wilkes, Ron Stone, Fred Tompkins, all deserve a nod. And then Major Burns, DJ Miller, Kerry Vincent, Corey Mayfield. Malik Fisher is another dude that deserves to be mentioned here. Peter Tamapeno was one of the linebackers as well. Then I included Sean Wade, Gary and Conley, and Sam Kidd among safeties and cornerbacks. Special teams player of the year. Kicker Tanner Brown of the Louisville Kings. Yeah, he ended up going 25 for 28 on his field goals, so led the league among people with more than 11 attempts with his 89.3 completion percentage. Hit several, 60-plus yard field goals. Hit a lot of big ones down the stretch for Louisville. Tanner Brown was an incredibly valuable asset to the Louisville Kings, and you see the difference when, Matt McCrane went 21 to 29 for DC over the season. Michael Lance for Orlando went 16 to 22. I don't think Lance didn't hit a 60-yarder. McCrane at least did a couple. The kicking wasn't as good from top to bottom this year, but Tanner Brown was fantastic, following in the place of guys like Brandon Aubrey and Jake Bates. So Tanner Brown was the best kicker in the league. He was the most important special teams player in all of the UFL. So he is the 2026 Tap That UFL Special Teams Player of the Year. And obviously the all UFL selection for Tap That. Punting. Punting, I would either have to say I would either give it to Brad Robbins of the Aviators, averaging 49.6 yards per punt, had 2 touchbacks, trapped 8 of those balls inside the 20-yard line. And, some of that is location dependent, sure, and that was on 20 punts. I think you could also say Jack Browning of the Orlando Storm and 28 punts, totaled 1,361 yards, averaging 48.6 yards per punt. 2 touchbacks, trapped 11 inside the 20. The league gave it to Ryan Sanborn of the Battlehawks, and certainly he was called on a lot. So was Colby Wadman of the Stallions. The punters were good this year. I just think what Brad Robbins was able to do in just 20 punts, how often he was able to put the offense on the other side in not ideal position. Jack Browning did it over the course of the season, and averaged nearly half a football field with each of his punts, trapped 11 inside the 20. Those would be my 2 picks for all UFL punter. If I had to make an absolute call here, I would say Jack Browning, probably just because he got more usage. But Brad Robbins, over 28 attempts, probably would have surpassed, Jack Browning's numbers that he ended up with. So, let's give another one to the Aviators. Let's say, Brad Robbins, you are the 2026 Tap That All UFL punter. Congratulations. The league also did returners of the year. I honestly don't know what CS means for Gary Jennings Jr. They gave that to him for just being, like being a returner. He also made 16 special teams tackles. I don't actually know what CS stands for, but we will do kick returner and punt returner of the year. The league has Chris Rowland from Orlando as kick returner and Sean Fresh as punt returner of the year. I mean, I absolutely see the logic for Chris Rowland. He ranked 7th in the league in kick return yards. Only had 13 tries at it, averaged 29 per return. But I think you either give this to Xavier Valade, averaged 27.8 yards per return, had a long of 54, 556 yards, led the league in total return yards. My pick would actually be Tyler Hudson. In 11 kick returns, 411 yards, averaging 37.4 yards per return. That is the most among qualifiers on this list. And I think, what did he have? The league's only kick return touchdown? So I would say kick return of the year, Tyler Hudson. That would be followed by Xavier Valade. And that'd be followed probably by Chris Rowland with his 29 yards per return. Punt returner of the year. And Sean Fresh returned 32 punts for 337 yards, leading the league by 128 yards. Averaged 10.5 per return, had a long of 50. Just straight up, though, the guy who was the best punt returner all year is probably Antwain Wells from the Aviators. 16 punt returns, 205 yards. That's 12.8 yards per return. Had a long of 46. So he was a lot more efficient than Sean Fresh. So I see giving it to Sean Fresh because of the much greater volume and, the much greater total production over the year. But for me, Antwain Wells was the best punt returner all year. There were a few others that were close there too, but there wasn't a lot of guys that had a bunch of punt returns. I count 5 dudes that had 15 or more. Kiki Kuti was one of them, but he did not fare too well. Jabray Barber was one. Drake Stoops had himself a good season returning punts. So I get the Sean Fresh pick, but to be a little different here and on some different logic, I think 16 attempts is enough for me to say, Antwain Wells, you did your job as a punt returner. And he was the more efficient of the two. If he had 32 punt returns like Sean Fresh, there's a good chance he would have had one longer than 50. And there's a good chance that he would have, well exceeded 337 punt return yards. Now, Alex Cook returned an interception and a fumble for a touchdown from the Stallions. All right. Nice. But I will go ahead. I'll do a returner of the year. Because Gary Jennings did 440 yards on kick returns, 23.2 yards per return. That was very good. My overall returner of the year, though, special teams contributor of the year, is Lawrence Keys III of the Houston Gamblers. Returned 19 kicks for 518 yards on a 27.3 yard per return average on kick returns. And on punt returns, 11 attempts, 134 yards. That's 12.2 yards per attempt. And where's all-purpose yards? Total offense. All-purpose yards. So Lawrence Keys as a receiver brought in 349 yards. I'm not sure if he had a touchdown. I hate myself, but I have to look. He was 12th in the league in receiving yards with 349 yards and 2 touchdowns. But Lawrence Key, the third, Keys, the third, was second in the entire league in all-purpose yards, behind Chris Rowland, who had about 180 more receiving yards and 55 more rushing yards than Lawrence Keys had. Lawrence Keys had 1,001 all-purpose yards and 652 of those 1,001 yards were from punt returns and kick returns. He had the most combined out of those two. He was incredibly important for the Houston Gamblers this year on special teams. So, kick returner of the year. Jesus Christ, what did I say? Kick returner of the year, I said Tyler Hudson. Punt returner of the year, Antwain Wells. Returner of the year, Lawrence Keys III, for everything he did in kicking and punt returns. Making him, cover more yardage in total this year than almost anybody else in the UFL. So congratulations to him. Yeah, he didn't get enough credit for what he did this year, for sure. All right. So that is my Tap That 2026 All UFL First Team with an asterisk because I couldn't help throwing in some extra people in there that were worth mentioning. Could do a whole other episode coming up with a second, third, fourth, fifth team, and it'd still be fun. But, just wanted to recap the UFL season, talk about this world of alternative professional football, spring football, indoor, arena, international, whatever the hell it is. Wanted to put that cool graphic I had AI make to use. Getting to wear a Louisville Kings shirt, talking about them winning the and go back, look at my season preview and futures article. I have a note next to the Louisville Kings in that they were my sleeper pick to win the championship for way different reasons than it kind of ended up being. I did not expect the defense to be such a force, but the way they ultimately ended up using their backfield, the production they got out of their skill positions, even when Chandler Rogers at quarterback was not like knocking anybody's socks off with his production. He was just once he got his footing, he was consistent. He was reliable. He was, conservative, but he was a good game manager. He responded well to getting his ass blown up by Derek Roberson, and I don't think they would have won a championship without Chandler Rogers either. And how fitting that they got to play Jason Bean for a little bit in the actual UFL championship game. So those are my 2026 UFL awards. Got to emphasize, Chris Redmond should have been the UFL Coach of the Year. I think Cam Gill's the MVP. I gave my input on the all UFL teams. There were so many on defense. There were so many. If you can combine running backs and tight ends, Columbus would have had more on the all UFL offensive side. But yeah, had to do that. I know it's been some time since the UFL championship happened, but wanted to digest it a little bit. See if there was any news that would change the way I was going to be talking about this. Of course, there was, as far as the markets, the future, what the league wants. how the league did from a ratings and attendance aspect this year. The quality of the product, which is trending too close to sanitized NFL kind of product. They need to get a little bit more of that, 2020, early 2000s XFL feel, or that 80s USFL. There has to be an edge, There's got to be like some gaudy teams with flames on the sides of their helmets and everything. People don't want to see the NFL like that because they have the NFL already. I think arena leagues, the ones that are successful, the arena and indoor leagues, they market themselves very well. They show big hits up against the wall. They say, boom, this is what you get when you come to our league. Big hits over the wall. Bang. Love to see that. Love to see people being able to get returns for touchdowns in those leagues. And there's some corny, gaudy aspects to some of those leagues, but that's part of it. The funny names, the crazy colors, this version of the UFL is just a little bit too uniform and standardized. You don't want it to be the NFL. And everybody's so afraid to market big hits and everything. But I promise you, arena and indoor do it, and it's a big reason why it's so popular with kids and families, and why everybody has a great time at arena and indoor games. So, yeah. This season had a lot of positive things about it. I already missed the season, but during the season, it's frustrating. This is a real crossroads kind of part where this spring league has actually survived. They've been around for years. There's new ownership that's made some positive changes, has kept some things unfortunately the same, has made some negative changes in my view. I think the positive steps were in the right direction. I think as long as you take more positive steps than negative steps, but there's some things that for the sake of the quality of the product on the field and in, doing as much for your fans as possible to make sure that they can enjoy your product as much as they're trying to, that definitely need to be done in the future. I don't want to feel emotionless when I watch this league. I want to, be excited. I want to be excited to watch these games. I want to be excited to root for the Louisville Kings and the Columbus Aviators in the future. If you are chasing being the NFL and everything being squeaky clean, no violence in the game of football somehow, people have the NFL for that. Why are they watching your league other than the fact that it's being played at a time when the NFL and college football isn't? The question I would pose to the league. Because you've got me on a hook. I love all, professional football. I love the Cincinnati Bengals. I love certain parts of the NFL. But if you followed this podcast, you know that the world of alternative professional football, spring, summer leagues, indoor, arena, international leagues, I find it semi-pro. I find absolutely fascinating. I'm in, but don't take that for granted and try to find more people in the realm of me who, are interested in watching football, watching good players that just aren't in the NFL, want to see things that you're not getting from the NFL. And that doesn't mean quirky, gimmicky rule changes every single time. That is the least necessary part. Though innovation is good. And, I don't love all the innovation things that the UFL has done, but at least they try new things. And there's a reason that the NFL ends up stealing a lot of that stuff from the UFL. One more point. Stop with the freaking sideline interviews. I don't care if it's with there's a very limited, sliver of sideline interviews that make any sense and are, worth the 30 seconds that they're on or whatever. Quit interviewing guys that just ran 96 yards for a touchdown. They can't breathe. They can't talk. You can't hear them. And there's never been a good question. So you got the interception and ran all the way back. Now you're excited. Walk us through what you were seeing there. I saw the quarterback. I was just following his eyes. And, at that point, it's just about making the play and being there. And I made the play, and, rest is history. That wasn't important. That wasn't valuable. That was that wasn't needed at all. The other thing, you don't have to keep interviewing the backup quarterbacks, and especially the fucking coaches on the sideline while the game is being played, while the units they are responsible for are actively playing. Interviewing a defensive coordinator when the defense is on the field. All right, coach, so what scheme you got set up? What are you looking for here? Well, we got to, hold on. Yeah, Tony, hey, go around. So what we're looking for here is, no. It is just broken up. That guy doesn't want to talk to you. He's coaching. We want him to coach undistracted. Find out later what he was looking for or whatever. But it doesn't make sense to interview a grown man coaching a live football game, trying to communicate with his players on the field. There's cool insider things that I like being able to hear what coaches say, like in big moments, like it feels authentic. And as someone who has not played organized football, hearing what a coach says when a guy like gets an interception, they're running down the field, or the things that they think to say, those are interesting and insightful to me. I could do without them, but they're interesting and insightful. But the sideline interviews suck with the backup quarterback. Like, that isn't like, they're consummate professionals, but like that isn't burning that guy up inside. So, all right, you guys are going, 4 flex right. What are you looking for here? All right, he's going to try to set up this. So we got a couple of things going on here. He's going to kind of, he didn't get it. Oh, is it? Stop doing those dumb sideline interviews. Anyway, we talked the good, we talked the bad, we talked the question marks, the future prognosis of the UFL. I hope it's around for a long time, but in this current form, I don't hope it's around for a long time. And I don't think and unfortunately, I think it will be in this current form. I think this is its best chance to last a long time, is the form that is the least interesting to the fans, because that is what has worked for the NFL. Go broad, general, kind of gimmicky, not tailored to people who, are just want to watch a lot of football. They get kind of corny with the gambling, aspects they incorporate. I don't need to hear about it from the commentators all the time. Some of the experts they have that are the gambling experts that they have do like their little report or whatever. I'm not going to say that these people aren't experts. I don't know, and I'm sure that they are. But they're not very relatable to people that are gambling on the UFL consistently. But, the Louisville Kings, tremendous season. I think that Louisville, Columbus, maybe even Orlando have some bright futures in the UFL. DC and St. Louis, that's up to them. But I think that DC certainly still has a healthy future. But look at Birmingham. You see how quickly something beautiful can fall apart. It's as simple as one coach moving on and making the wrong hire. Houston and Dallas, I don't think you need to see them I would love to see the Portland, Seattle's, Sacramento's, Oakland, San Jose's, Salt Lake City's, Santa Fe's. Boise, I'd be interested to see, but I'm less hopeful on that one. Let's see how Oklahoma City works out. But bring back the Seattle Sea Dragons. I don't know about the Michigan Panthers. I don't think you touch New York. I think you could do the New Jersey General, bring them back. They've got a great brand. They're entrenched in the history of spring football. That's one you could bring back. I don't think New Orleans needs to come back necessarily. Memphis, I believed that they loved the showboats, as did I, but the reboot of it was not well executed. The colors were boring. They did not have good intent. They didn't put a good, team on the field like while they were back. So, other than Seattle, maybe New Jersey, I don't think the league should be looking to bring back. I think the league should be looking to explore more markets like Columbus and Louisville. I was surprised by how well Orlando did considering their history in spring football. So, went through my 2026 TabVat UFL Season Awards. Coach of the Year, Chris Redman. Offensive Player of the Year, Jack Plummer. Defensive Player of the Year, Cam Gill. League MVP, Cam Gill. Special Teams Player of the Year, Tanner Brown. I went through my whole UFL First Team Plus. Folks, I hope you enjoy all the football that's going on. YouTube. Weird things are getting streamed live from all football. Arena. Check out the Continental Football League. College football is right around the corner already, like 2 months away. Football is a year-round sport. Don't ever forget that. At least on this topic, I'll see y'all next spring, or at least in the lead up to it. And thanks for listening to this episode of the TabVat MMA podcast. As you see below, follow me on Instagram at RotoBrady MMA. Tune in later this week for more MMA discussion with UFC Fight Night coming up. And hopefully I get some of those interlude episodes rescheduled and out there to you fine people. Thanks for listening to the 2026 TabVat UFL Season Honors and Awards and Recap. Have yourselves a great week. Go Louisville Kings. Bring the Seattle Sea Dragons back. Go Kentucky Barrels. Go Cincinnati Dukes of the Continental Football League. Fuck off International Arena Football Alliance or whatever the hell. And peace.